Hi, thanks so much for joining us today. We are in conversation with Zaretta Hammond. We are so excited about our conversation today, which is going to touch on culturally responsive teaching and learning recovery. So welcome, Zaretta. I'm joined today with my colleagues, Joyce Highhouse and Nicodemus Ford. We are so honored to have Zaretta Hammond with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'll lead us off with the first question, which is one of the things your book addresses so clearly is common misconceptions about culturally responsive teaching. And so can you talk a little bit about why all educators should understand culturally responsive teaching if we want students to be successful in school?
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. One of the things I try to help educators do is to really understand the ways in which we kind of use it interchangeably with multicultural education, social justice education, and those aren't necessarily interchangeable. So culturally responsive teaching, as Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings talks about it, and she coined the term, really is about helping students who have been marginalized historically reclaim that academic prowess. So the reality is when we look at our data, and so much of that data has Black and Brown children at the bottom chronically, year in and year out, we really need to be able to accelerate their learning. So culturally responsive teaching, when you truly understand the science of learning behind it, is a vehicle for that acceleration. Our misconception is this is around diversity and inclusion, which just has a social dimension, or social justice, which just has kind of the student's consciousness about the context around them. But neither one of those two really address how to build students' learning muscles. So more than just motivation, this is really about application of the science of learning that uses students' funds of knowledge as cognitive hooks to make learning stickier.
Um, and, we still have so much work to do around those other areas, Zaretta, like around multicultural teaching and around DEI and inclusion. And I wonder if you see those things as happening sort of side by side, or how do those ideas intersect or connect?
Well, I think the reality is we put too much emphasis on diversity and inclusion, in the sense that it's not that they're not important, but they're not a matter of side by side. When you understand that culturally responsive teaching is about accelerating learning, and you understand the science of learning, then you understand that social emotional learning and development are a component of that cognition. So if the idea is to create environments where there's the diversity as an asset, and inclusion allows every student to come into the classroom and feel, that sense of belonging, then that's necessary, but it's not sufficient for learning. So when you start to try and reduce it to one or the other, beside or behind, that's problematic. This is actually an integrated algorithm. And when you understand what your core purpose is, right, to upend inequity by design, then the antidote to that is to be more responsive to who the student is, so you can build that academic prowess. In order to do that, we know children are whole people, so we need to have the social emotional component there. I talk about that as the learning partnership in the Ready for Rigor framework. So again, that classroom environment has to have a sense of um, being a safe space, a intellectually safe space, meaning someone's not going to call me stupid because of the color of my skin or my accent, as well as a socially safe space. Microaggressions aren't there. So there's a way in which this is all work so that we can really talk about powerful teaching and learning. The biggest challenge we have is to keep siloing it. Do we do this? Do we do that first? Do we do that? No, you need to just understand how they intersect, and then assess your current situation so you really can understand what you have in place. You might have really wonderful, inclusive classrooms where the kids are still reading 2 grade levels behind.
Mm,
So
true.
the fact is, this is not a matter of, oh, I don't need to attend to that. You need to maintain that, but now we need to pull in the academic component to that. But you can't go to the academic if you don't have the social emotional, because we know that, social emotional and academic and cognitive are all interlinked. They're not, I'm going to do 15 minutes of social emotional learning at the beginning, and then we're never going to attend to that. We should really be attending to that when we go into the deepest part of learning. We're trying to get kids to really engage in productive struggle. That's why all folks who are teaching need to understand how to help students become cognitively independent learners who engage in productive struggle. That's what it means when your question says, if we want all students to be successful. When you can define success, that a student is cognitively independent, when we are breeding dependent learners, and even if they're not dependent learners, there's a pedagogy of compliance in full effect. So again, I think it's really understanding the components and how they intersect and create synergy.
So there's lots of talk, Zaretta, around this notion about deeper learning most recently. And I think it kind of connects in with what you were kind of just referencing in terms of like the components, right? Of what it really takes to be able to create an environment where students can feel like they're both motivated, supported, and cared for, where they want to engage in deeper learning. And so I just love your thoughts just on both the idea around deeper learning, just your initial like reactions and thoughts to where we are at in this landscape. Is that another phrase that maybe is also just being, thrown out there, much like an equity phrase, right? Without a whole lot of context of what we're looking for. And then maybe just some context setting around, what's the nexus, maybe around the notion of culturally responsive teaching and how those two can really intersect and support. Because I really do see that they both can be very complementary, but would love to get your thoughts and insights on either one of those topics.
I think our biggest challenge is that we keep talking about them as if they're two things.
Mhm.
So even listening the way that question is phrased, I very appreciate the way you're doing that. But at the same time, I want to challenge us all to listen to the mental models that we're bringing forward. So deeper learning is just what the brain does. That means that information processing, I can take in new information, I can turn it from inert information to usable knowledge. And so when the deeper learning movement went forward, Hewlett put a lot of money and time, and there is the deeper learning network that is happening. That's what they're looking at. And part of what they're looking at is, how do we create these environments in which students are the leaders of their learning? And it's not a motivational issue. Competence precedes confidence. So if I have kids that are 2 grade levels behind, there's no amount of motivation that's actually going to help them if they don't believe they can. Why? Only the learner learns. I love the idea of deeper learning because it is as close as we're coming to actually talking about cognition. I think we miss the opportunity because we keep talking about it like it's a program. We keep talking about it like it is about motivation, or we keep talking about it like, oh, it's just project-based learning or having these fun activities. Here's the thing, if you can't help coach the student in how to take in new information, how to be meta-strategic, not just metacognitive, then they will never change their learning moves. So the beauty of deeper learning is it really is trying to center social and cognitive neuroscience together. Now, culturally responsive teaching, as I said at the top of our conversation, is a lens. So how then do I help lift up the cultural knowledge, the funds of knowledge students are bringing in, so that I can anchor into that and use that to help them get to their aha moment? It's not a motivational technique. So the fact is, all instruction is culturally responsive. The question is, to whose culture is it responding? And if the teacher doesn't have a bicultural lens, a tricultural lens, then they don't understand the schema that the student is bringing and how to help the student activate that, lift it up, bring it to that working memory where new content has to be coupled with old content. That's just science.
Mhm.
So culturally responsive teaching is about that science.
Mhm.
And the deeper learning is about improving information processing. So I actually talk about those two. We need to stop with the it's one or the other, or where do they intersect? They don't come apart. They are
Mhm.
two sides of the same coin.
Mm.
How we language this in our various positions, leader, teacher, instructional coach, district central office person, right, intermediary organization person, is going to determine if people can shift their mental models.
Mm.
Because we're still talking about it in a way as if culturally responsive teaching sits over here, deeper learning. Oh, what interesting connections might they have?
Mhm.
We're doing this to ourselves. And we're not getting progress, so that adults ultimately are sitting around like, oh, I need a PD on that. And we don't understand basic learning theory.
Mm.
And what Freire says is if we can't move toward praxis,
Mm.
conceptual understanding, the design principles of, turned into informed action, then stepping back with critical analysis and our own self-reflection, we won't get better.
Mm.
We keep looking for programs. So I think deeper learning is really powerful framing. I think it's missing a couple of things the way it's currently being rolled out and disseminated, because it doesn't actually leverage the funds of knowledge kids are bringing in. It can be reduced again to, oh, we're doing a maker space, or we're doing project-based learning, or kids are just having fun and it's motivational. But we are not trying to actually get at the very thing that white supremacy culture put in place through public education back in the day to ensure students would be sorted along racial and socioeconomic lines. And that is the underdevelopment of their cognition. And that's just, you go back in the research, you go back in the history, but no one is centering that. We keep thinking that's an add-on. We keep thinking it's about motivation or it's deeper learning. Get to the stuff underneath and let the labels go.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I have to go after this question. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean about students becoming metastrategic in addition to metacognitive?
Yeah, this comes out of some of the writings from folks out of Project Zero at Harvard's graduate school. And the folks who have, Mark Church and Ron Rickard, who do the Making Thinking Visible, have continued to put forth this idea that the way students get smarter, the way they accelerate their learning, is to become aware of their own learning moves, right? Other people talk about this as well. But this idea of the only way, just like the person in the gym, the only way you get better is that you are going to run on the treadmill. Your personal trainer getting on the treadmill is not going to make you better. The personal trainer saying, oh, you can only do 3 and I asked you to do 10, I'll do those other 7 for you, is not going to get you better. And this is exactly what happens in classrooms. Teachers over scaffold, they jump in and they want to do that. Instead, what I suggest is we need to be coaching students. So we need to be having instructional conversations. What are we talking about in those instructional conversations? We're asking them to step back in that critical analysis that it's part of praxis, right? There's a student praxis cycle, and to reflect, okay, here's the task in front of us. We're having a conversation that is centered on, I taught you 5 processes, strategies, tools, whatever it may be, over the last 8 weeks. Now let's just talk about what's the best of these 5 tools. What are the 2 that work best for this? We're not actually doing the task.
Mhm.
We're just being meta strategic
Mm.
because too many kids are just being compliant to do the thing.
Mhm.
Opportunity myth that TNTP put out. One of the very first statistics they share is 71% of students complete assigned work, and only 17% meet the standard in those assignments.
Mm.
And so what we're seeing is compliance. versus we're actually helping kids hit the standard.
Mm.
And when we're meta strategic, it's almost like playing chess. You're spending a lot of time just looking at the chessboard, right? We've all seen that, right? Just like golfers, you're spending a lot of time, you're being strategic. People aren't just like checked out.
Mhm.
There's actual cognitive work that you can't see happening. And part of what we need to be able to do to help students, this is what I think is powerful about deeper learning, is that is what has to be raised to the top. We have to make the invisible visible. And we can't do that if we aren't having those conversations with students. I taught writing when I was in the classroom. There was no amount of red ink I could put on that paper that would actually make the students see that run-on sentence. All they saw was more and more red ink. The more red ink they saw, the more internal loathing they had and thought, I can't get this. But here's the thing. When I shifted and I realized, well, that approach, I never wanted to stop using red pen, right? Use purple or pink or something. But it was more, we had to have these meta strategic conversations. What did we learn about punctuation? Do you think that's the right punctuation? We just had to have a talk about it. Once that student saw it, oh my goodness. Then it's like everywhere. Oh, how did that get in there? And the same thing would happen when we did peer editing, when they were helping someone else look in their paper and giving them feedback, they could see things that they never would see in their own writing, right? Because we have confirmation bias in our own brains. So there are all these techniques. That's what meta strategic is. Can I lift your awareness so you can change your own learning moves?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we are just so grateful for the time that you spent with us today, a master class in understanding the connections between culture and the brain, and expectations, and the ways in which we are harming our own selves within the education sector by asking the wrong questions or focusing on the wrong things. And so just really want to appreciate your time. So at Pivot and Core, we bring over 20 years of experience driving continuous improvement and really helping schools and districts to think about how to design and implement solutions to these challenges in achieving educational justice, and really that focus work of improving teaching and learning. So we hope that you'll take this time to learn a little bit more about us and what we provide to school districts. In particular, CORE can provide remote consulting services. And so they can customize those services to meet your team's specific needs around addressing mathematics curriculum implementation and effective instruction, as well as ELA. And at Pivot, particularly in the prevention and intervention services area that Nicodemus, Joyce, and I lead, we focus on ensuring equity and excellence for all students. And that includes building MTSS that focus on improved outcomes for all students, policies and systems around identifying and supporting students with learning disabilities, addressing those sometimes challenging issues of compliance related to special education, and really how we can better align the delivery of general education and special education. We also really want to build your capacity around the implementation of evidence-based curricula and high-quality instruction. Here's our contact information. You can contact the Director of Literacy, Carrie Thomas Beck, at CORE, and here's her contact information, or myself over at the Pivot side. So thank you again for being part of our conversation today. Take care.